Hello, this is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. We are headed to the northern half of the island, roughly to a place called Campbell River. And we're going to see some indigenous artwork there, and we're going to see a great waterfall, one of the best. And then we're going to head over to across the onto the mainland to Powell River, and that's an interesting place too. So come along, let's go to Campbell River. We drove out to the coast to Pacific Rim National Park and visited Tofino and Ucluelet there. Now let's head back across the island to the eastern shore and then north up here to Campbell River. We drove toward Campbell River, which a place that unofficially marks the boundary between the more populated southern part of the Vancouver Island and the more remote northern half. Spring was just starting to bloom as we drove along the eastern shore of the island toward Campbell River. We stopped at Oyster Bay, where boats were harvesting oysters from the oyster farms. Getting people to work at the oyster farm was the main challenge. These oysters did not produce an abundance of pearls, and most of the product is shipped to Japan. And we watched a few seagulls scrounging around on the oyster piles along the banks. Mennonites, a religious cultural group from Germany, had a sizable community in the area. Mennonites made an agreement during World War II to grow and plant trees in lieu of conscription, and the resulting forest growth is evident today. We saw several efforts at shoreline restoration rather than building rock and concrete seawalls. Seawalls might look neat and tidy, but they are environmentally less desirable than natural shorelines. And an artificial seawall creates a loss of beach with no sand and vegetation and no habitat for birds, insects, or small animals. It also takes people out of the water, which creates fewer recreational opportunities, and shoreline restoration by way of natural beaches, like you see here, results in greater public and natural access to the beach and water and resulting recreation. All right, we're on our way to Campbell River. Let's head that direction. Here we are. We are in Campbell River. Campbell River one time claimed to be the small seaplane capital of the world. And there are a number of old seaplanes like this on land, as well as some active ones in the water. You might hear the sound of a seaplane overhead as we looked at the waterfront. It's a nice, well built up waterfront, nice place to walk on, and a very tourist oriented place. And here's one of the Canada Coast Guard ships that was in port when we were there. This is the inland passage to Alaska, and it is fun to watch American tugboats pulling barges loaded with supplies from Seattle to ports in Alaska. They go right by the harbor here, as do the Alaska-bound cruise ships. But when we were there were no cruise ships sailing by. Ripple Rock was a double-peaked mountaintop just below the water surface in the Seymour Narrows in Discovery Passage, which is not far north of Campbell River here. Over the years, well over 100 ships were damaged or sunk, and over 100 people drowned. It was just too dangerous to keep. It had to be blown up. 10 times more explosive power than a similar operation above water was needed. It was the largest non-nuclear planned explosion on record. It was the year 1958, and after several attempts, it was one of the first Canadian live coast-to-coast television broadcasts of a news event. Now ships can safely pass through this area. Campbell River still claims to be the salmon capital of the world, but like elsewhere, the salmon continue to be decimated by all kinds of things like bears, eagles, otters, seals, man-made traps, overfishing, dams, and human pollution. Ships like this one are net rakers that drag the ocean floor of all sea life. You can see the large gray spool on the deck that wraps in the nets. The salmon are having a rough time of it. Just take a look at the lifespan of a salmon fish, and you can see what trouble they're in. After hatching, the young salmon remain in fresh water for 1 to 2 years, but only 10% reach the stage to swim to the ocean, where they live for 2 to 4 years. Then when they try to return to fresh water, only 5 out of 5,000 return to their freshwater base to reproduce. Wildlife cannot sustain existence under such continual pressure. Campbell River is growing, like a lot of places, and here you see where mobile homes in the foreground are being replaced by more expensive apartment accommodation. Lots of construction going along everywhere, and this area we're in right now, we'll just drive along this long route along the waterfront part of the city. And it's built up quite nicely with walking areas as well as other good traffic areas. Some homes are older along this area, but there's a long waterfront in Campbell River. We stayed at the Elk Falls Provincial Park, which is just outside of Campbell River. If you're in Campbell River, you have to see Elk Falls. It's about an 8-10 meter drop of roaring water. It is just a few kilometers out of town, and if the falls don't impress you enough, enjoy the steel structure and staircase to get down to it. It's a long ways down, and it's a long walk back up again, but worth every single step. It's a great structure, and the view of the falls is great. And walk across the suspension bridge. It moves as you walk, but it is safe, and it's just an exciting thing to do while you're there. You're many, many meters above the canyon floor, and it's all bolted together and completely safe. And enjoy the roar of the water. There are lots of totem poles to see in many coastal communities, including Campbell River. Early indigenous people lived in a rich environment. They did not have to fear starvation. Fish, wildlife, and vegetation was readily available. This enabled them to have spare time for leisure and to create carvings, paintings, weavings, and other forms of art. They had objects of wealth and time to visit and exchange resources. There were cultural gatherings where ceremonies occurred, including the potlatch, where items of value were displayed, traded, and given away to demonstrate wealth and prestige. And we are looking at examples from this rich, indigenous Canadian Pacific Coast culture. We're ready to go to Powell River. We have to go across the ferry back onto the mainland. The ferry pulled into Powell River. At one time, Powell River produced enough paper for 1 in every 25 newspapers in the world. It came from the big plant here. The mill is down now, so like many communities, Powell River is turning to tourism. Company houses like these were built in the same time period, and they have that similar look about them. Same size, similar characteristic roof line on the front there, and the front porch. Powell River has this unique floating breakwater of concrete ships, originally formed to protect the logging pond at the pulp and paper plant. 10 ships form the protective breakwater, 1 from World War I and 9 from World War II. They were built largely of concrete during the war years, when steel was in short supply and in high demand for the war effort. The ships were slow and more cumbersome than their steel ship counterparts, and found little use after the war. The largest number of remaining ones still afloat in the world form this protective harbor at Powell River. Today, they are a tourist's delight. We drove about 20 kilometers north to the north end of the Sunshine Coast, to the remote, get away from it all, small community of Lund. When the old original Malaspina Hotel that was built in 1905 burned down, and they were clearing the debris away to build this newer one that you see here today, they discovered a human skeleton buried under the front steps of the old hotel. Powell River has a nice seawall along some of its waterfront. We walked along the seawall for a while, but we did not walk far, as it was pouring rain. You know what I notice about people on the coast? It's raining cats and dogs here. But people are out and about everywhere. They're walking on the seawall and walking their dogs, and like I say, quite different than at home on the prairies where I grew up. A day like this, we'd all be inside grumbling about the weather and not going outside, and certainly not doing any work. But I asked a fellow why people are out so much out here on the coast when it rains. And he said, you know, it rains a lot out here. There's no use losing half the day or half the time just because it's raining. So you just put your coat on, your jacket, and away you go about your business. As we drove south, we saw several of these signs. The Sunshine Coast Trail is about a 10-day hike to here from Langdale to the south, which is a distance of about 200 kilometers. And here's the interesting part. It has a series of 14 huts that sleep from 3 to 10 hikers. It sounds like an interesting trail. We have made 5 videos on Vancouver Island here on this tour. I hope you enjoyed them. If you did, hit the subscribe button. That'll tell you when we're going to be posting more videos. Until then, we'll see you on down the road. This is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. So long for now.